Our next speaker is Mike Squire, and he's the program manager for the Englishman River Water Service. And as most of you know, they're doing this really interesting feasibility study and for the Aquifer Storage and Recovery. And this is, again, here we are at Englishman River. It's right at the forefront of innovation, I guess, and so we'd love to hear more about it. And, Mike Squire.
Thanks, Faye. I'll start off with a little bit of history, just to give you some background as to where we are, where we came from, where we are today, and where we want to be in 20, 50 years. We're not only building for now, we're building for 50 years in the future, and for the future generations. And also looking at the environment is a huge, huge part of our endeavors and our work. With that, that's the title, Aquifer Storage and Recovery is a feasible water management solution to help improve fish habitat. ASR, or Aquifer Storage and Recovery, it's a very small part of what we're looking at, and I'll really try to explain how we got there to looking at this technology that's been developed. It's been in the process over 20 years now in the States. That's our mission statement, and that mission statement has been in place since the 90s, and you can tell it's a 90s mission statement because it doesn't have the word sustainable in it. But the important thing is it has the word fish in it, and that's pretty innovative. For back in the 90s, we're thinking about, obviously we're on the Englishman River as our source, our future water source, and it's environmentally sensitive use of water to improve fish habitat and domestic water supply. So essentially, I'll try to explain that a little further. And it really, to be successful, we need to accomplish this mission requires careful stewardship of both the surface water and our groundwater sources for the Englishman River Water Service. So that was the original study. That actually started, this is nothing new, regional water supply studies started back in the early 70s. Initially, they looked at 3 different sources. Cameron Lake was one of them. Englishman River was the other, the second source, and obviously the South Fork, South Nanaimo River was the third source. In the late 80s, the GNWD, now the city of Nanaimo, they opted out. They determined it was more feasible for them to go it alone and develop their own surface water supply from that source. About the same time, or very shortly after, in the early 90s, the province actually knew that we were looking for the surface water and needed more water out of either the Englishman River or Cameron Lake. They wanted us to look at the regional approach at the creation of a joint venture partnership to look towards the Englishman River as both a win-win for fish enhancement and a win-win for future water supply. That being, at that time, the Englishman River was in dire straits. Dave can probably speak very at length to that. Fish stocks were depleting, something was going on, water levels were at the all-time low, something needed to be done. So the province stepped in, said, you guys need to look at the Englishman River, you need to impound some more storage, why don't you do it for both fish and both your future water supply. So that's essentially how we got to where we are right now. What we're looking at is a regional water supply, and again, some more history. So there's the town of Qualicum Beach that currently has a population of 9,000. 40 years by 2050, they're looking at 15 to 16,000 in population. French Creek, currently population around 5,000 people. What the future population predicts by 2050, by doubling that to around 10,500 people. City of Parksville, we currently reside at just over 12,000 people, and we're looking at a high estimate population by 2050 of 25,000 people. Again, in use, current population 5,000, and future population, again, a high estimate by year 2050, 12,000 people. So in this region, looking ahead, this is what we plan for. When we build infrastructure, we're not building for today, we're building for 50 years from now. We're looking at a population of just over 63,000 for the Oceanside region. And that's kind of what our infrastructure, what we're building for right now. There's key components to that. The ERWS, the Englishman River Water Service, only comprises of the city of Parksville and Anus. Town of Qualicum Beach and French Creek have opted out and deferred it to future generations. So right now, we are currently, for the city of Parksville and Anus, that's where we're building our infrastructure for it. There is a buy-in option when Qualicum Beach needs the water and when French Creek needs the water as well. So there's in the agreement, there is a buy-in option at that time when they do need that water. So just strictly talking about the city of Parksville, we're very fortunate to have two water sources, both the Englishman River and also our well water that we receive from our railway wells and our Springwood wells. It's used seasonally in the Englishman River. Currently, right now, we can only use our water during the summer time when the turbidity, when the river is not muddy, we can actually use it, and it's to health standards. Right now, obviously, it's too turbid, it's too muddy, it's not drinkable water. It's only in the summertime. And our well water we use year-round to help augment both summer flows, and right now we're on well water for the winter time. Now this is of concern, and just mind you, this is strictly talking about the Parksville Aquifer. It only has one monitoring well in it. Ideally, every aquifer should probably have several monitoring wells to give it really good trending. But this is giving a general trend, and the general trend is down. The aquifer is being depleted. Basically, it's not receiving water, it's getting water. We're actually taking out too much water before it has time to actually replenish. So the general trend is worrisome. There's been some overpumping. Things are happening. Lots of things have happened. Such as the provincial highway has come through there, the new Inland Island Highway. There's been more developed upstream and in that aquifer. There's more private wells being brought online. Climate change. There's been overpumping like I talked about. 2/3 of the aquifer is outside the city of Parksville's boundary. We essentially don't have any control over that. It's more of the provincial jurisdiction, but aquifers don't see boundaries like cities do. So it is concerning, and it's something that that's why, again, why we're here today and talking about this. Looking at our maximum day, this is what we designed for as engineers. We designed for the worst case scenario. This is your maximum day during the winter time. Typically around Christmas time when we get more visiting population coming here and using more water. This is top line here is our well system capacity. Right now, in the winter time, we only have our wells. If you project that line out, by around 2022, we're going to run out of water for our well system as it sits right now, if we don't do anything about it. Some of this is out of our control, especially in the summertime. I'll talk about that in the next slide. But basically, this is where the demand exceeds our supply. And, that's 5-7 years from now. This is the maximum day summer demand. This is increasing. This is, again, a peak day when there's things going on in the community. We're primarily a resort-based community. Our population almost doubles. We jump from 12,000 people to 20,000 people in certain days of the summertime. There's things going on in the community park. About 8,000 visiting population come here and use the water. So this is what's happening. Again, if you project that line out, by about 2016, we need to have more water. This is both groundwater and surface water that we currently have for the city of Parksville. So again, this is why we're building a new intake, new treatment plant, etc. So we know this is coming. We're doing a lot of things with water conservation efforts to try to curb that down and defer some of that infrastructure expense. But the very interesting thing, if you look, this is a graph of the Englishman River, and what I call, it's very flashy. This is flow in blue line right here. So this was 2 years ago, starting in November, right about now, when the west coast storms start to hit. The Englishman River can go from basically 2 cubic meters a second to over 200 cubic meters a second within hours. And with that, it brings a lot of silts and sediment down through it. But if you take just this one day here, And it's not the peak day by any means. Just that amount of water that flowed down the river in the one day is enough to supply us 50 years from now for a whole year, for the whole region. So it's not a matter of, like I just pointed out, we're in dire straits, we need water, we need to improve our intake and upgrade that. We have an abundant supply of water. What our problem is getting the water when we need it. Obviously in the wintertime we have a mouthful. So what we need to do is look at water management and look at water harvesting. And how do you harvest that water in the wintertime, capture it, and then use it for the summertime supply when we truly do need it. So again, we're looking at innovative, cost-effective ways to harvest that fresh water for use year-round and in those real peak demands. This is the watershed, like Dave was pointing out. It's about 324 kilometers square. That's the catchment of the Arrowsmith Dam. That was our first phase. So we built the dam back in the mid-90s, mid to late 90s. We looked at that. That phase is complete. The second phase we're looking at, and then in the interim we're using the City of Parksville's intake right now, our surface water intake located down at the bottom of Turner Road. Phase 2, always planned, was to build a new intake. Our original plan was to build the intake just at the confluence, just below the confluence of the South Englishman River and the Englishman River. And phase 3 would be 10 years later, water treatment. So we're going to phase it in. So the Arrowsmith Dam, it was built between 1998 and 1999, and it was commissioned in 2000, 2001, and it holds about 9 million cubic meters of water. And we typically operate it between May and October. We release that water. That's the location of the dam in relation to Parksville. As the crow flies, it's about 25 kilometers to the southwest. There's an aerial view of the dam. There's a spillway right there. That was April 2009. That was a drought year. That was a worrisome year. The dam is only built for a 1 in 15-year drought return period. This, in 2009, it was more of a 1 in 50-year drought return period. So we could build, a higher dam and still wouldn't fill. We still wouldn't have that water regardless. There's another view of the dam, the spillway in operation. We got the boom around it. And another, that's a darker version, looking to the south. And that's what it looks like in a good winter. So we can get at least 10 to 12 feet of snow up there. And snowpack does help. Helps augment some of that water during the summertime and hold it as storage. It'll give us another week or two of storage. So again, looking at that catchment area, it only comprises about 1.5% of the total Englishman River water catchment area. And what it does is, it certainly does its lion's share of work for the Englishman River when we first started bringing it on. So what it does, we have 9 million cubic meters of storage. About half of that is for fisheries purposes. Now this is a lot of lines here. Very bottom line, it's hard to see, it's orange colored line. That is the flow of the Englishman River between July and October, an average flow in the Englishman River between 1979 and 1998. And as you can see, in certain periods of time of the year between August and September, mid-September, it fell below critical rearing, 1 in 79 drought return period. And that's 5.1% now. Very poor rearing flow. And obviously that's why the province stepped in and said, you need to augment that flow. In green, the green line here represents the average flow in the Englishman River post-dam construction between 2000 and 2010. And you can see it's significantly improved the flow. More flow in the river, more wetted perimeter, more habitat, good for fish. Again, this is the same sort of data that Dave presented in a different format, taken directly from the source, from Ecofish study. you can see, starting in 1999, the significant salmon escapement estimates from showing coho salmon, Chinook salmon, and pink salmon. And this additional flow obviously has allowed additional stocking of fry and smolts, and the creation of rearing side channels, and Dave's good work and obviously tremendous volunteer work has contributed to that. So again, you know, you can point to that as a huge success. So we're happy to be a pretty important partnership with the Englishman River, and again, getting back to that word fish in the mission statement, it's good to see. It's really good to see, and I can see more of it happening. Again, getting back to the future plan, back in 2005, we approached senior government, the provincial government, DFO, and the health authority, getting on to phase 2. What do we do about the intake? 2016 is coming near, and talked about, again, the original intake location being at the confluence, and we talked to MVIHES, the health authority, and they basically said you need to mitigate your current risk where your intake is existing right now. Again, it's on Turner Road. It's below 2 highways. There's a potential of fuel spill. If you look at the new Inland Island Highway, sorry for that picture, it's a little dark with this light, but there's scuppers coming off the drains of the new Inland Highway. That was one of the first bridges that they built, and the scuppers are directly, they directly drain right to the Englishman River. So if there's a fuel spill, our water source is in jeopardy. And we currently rely on our first responders to tell us if there's an accident on a bridge and to shut the river station down right away. There's no good equipment or good monitoring control equipment that will shut it down automatically, unfortunately. So it's worrisome. It does keep people like me in the water conveyor industry awake at night. But the new bridges, anything north of that, they've actually plumbed all those in and put them into detention ponds and water quality infiltration galleries, and they've done the right thing there. Unfortunately, we have that there again, but we also have the other bridge to deal with. We have, it's below a railway. There's septic fields upstream of it, oil tanks, and it's below a floodplain. The current intake is in a floodplain as well, and it's below one sanitary sewer crossing right there. So not ideal. 40 years ago, probably a good economical, efficient place to have an intake. Nowadays, looking 50 years ahead, no, we want that above the majority of the urban development. The DFO, what their main concern was, given the proposed intake location, they wanted to have that as far downstream as feasibly possible. So there's a bit of a balance there between what MVIHES wanted and what DFO wanted. So somewhere in the middle, my gosh, that's actually where we ended up. The new intake proposed location, we went through studies, we went through a triple bottom line analysis, taking into account social, financial, and environmental aspects, and came out that the best location for the new intake is just upstream of the new Inland Highway Bridge, that's Highway 19. On the other side is our public works yard, and the water treatment plant will be located right up here. And we did purchase that property directly adjacent to our public works yard. So operationally it makes sense, and again, we're above the main risks, and we're below our originally proposed location. So looking at it, this is our very first preliminary draft. It's very conceptual. That's what the intake, what we're looking at. It's a side channel, a side inlet intake. We don't want to be in the river. Our existing intake right now, it's in the river. It's very cumbersome to operate. Every time we have to actually back flush it, it blows up water or blows up air, silt, and occasionally every 3 years we have to go in with a excavator to scarify those gravels. We don't want to be in the river. We want to get in there once, do the proper thing, and get out, and have very little maintenance to actually operate that. We And I'll show you in the future slides, we went down to Washington State and looked and toured a few of these intake locations, and they were for fish hatchery intakes. So obviously they're fish friendly. So again, we're borrowing some of that technology that's already been done, tried and true, and going to look at applying it here. So one of the goals we're looking at that we told our consultants is we need to integrate it into a natural environment. I don't know if any of you, I'm sure a lot of you know this area. It's just upstream underneath the bridge, and there's a trail network through here. So we didn't want to have something that's very intrusive and very abrupt and sitting on the bank of the river. We want to actually, if we can have the intake here and then move the actual pumping station back and integrate it into the natural environment, there's very good ways to do that. And then what we can do is we can use that natural trailway and use it. We need access to the intake. Why don't we, build a trailway down there so it's common use? The public can use it, and we can use it to actually gain access to the intake as well. Makes sense. We like to have our public on top of our infrastructure. If there's anything that goes wrong, guess who's going to call us first? We can't be there all the time. Again, it comes up to, it's like the volunteer thing. We need the people's help, and it is the people's water. That's what we're conveying at this point. So yeah, we're looking at integrating it into the trailway. And obviously, if we're going to get in there once, we don't want no net fisheries loss. We want a net fisheries gain. Why don't we, if we have to excavate in there, that's ideal. We can create some pooling. Coho love pools. We're going to be displacing some habitat along the bank there, but why don't we gain it upstream and downstream? We can do that by simply going in, and experts like Dave can point and shoot and say, this works, guys. So yeah, it's pretty excited to doing something in there. And just to kind of give you an example, and we can also have a more accurate flow measurement in the summertime. The flows get very low, as you've seen, down to 1.6 cubic meters a second, and that's pretty critical, especially for drawing water here. We want to know how much water is left for fish, so that's very critical, and report that as well. So this is what it looks like right here. Again, this picture is a little dark with these lights, but an overview. There's a bit of a rock outcrop on the river here, so we're looking downstream, right bank would be the new intake location. Again, there's a zoomed up view. There's the rock outcrop here. And what we could do is basically we need to put a bit of an armoring structure around that rock, and there's a way to do that and blend it into the natural environment called Disney rock. I hate to use that expression, but it works. It does work, but it needs to be navigable. If there's people using this, they need to recognize this, that it's an intake, and there's going to be a weir potentially right in here and the intake. So want to blend it into the natural environment, but we also want to, if there's any obstruction, people see it and go, okay, got it. It's like a little waterfall there. This is the one that's one of the locations down in Washington State on a fish hatchery intake. There's screens located down here. They're very tiny stainless steel screens, and they don't impinge fish or little small fry or smolts. Lots of them, of course, so there's no velocity coming through, no real strong velocity. It's very, very little, and huge big gallery. That would be over in this area. This would all be still in the floodplain, so this would be obviously daylighting during the normal summer, but in floods, you would have this would be below water. And again, sorry, it's a little dark, but that would be the weir, and it's actually a pneumatic weir, and if you need the water to come more directly onto the screens, it actually rises up a little bit and creates the water flowing over into this direction here. And you can see the fishermen love it too. There's fly fishing right in there. There's a nice little pool that they've created there. Again, that's another view. And then again, if you can integrate sort of the trail network people want to see the river, so they're going on the trails. If you walk along the trail, there's always little outshoots of trails going to the river if you just want to look and explore. But if you can have a little viewing platform, that's part of our intake, why not? As long as it's safe, why not let the public on it? So those are the things we told our consultants to strongly look at, and hopefully we can have something. But again, that's our very preliminary look at what we're trying to do with our intake. Phase 3, water treatment. We've done a lot of pilot testing. We looked at conventional sand filtration and compared it to membrane filtration. And obviously, because that river, like I mentioned before, is very flashy, we have very quick turbid events, it needs to have a system that's very reactive. And it's been determined, obviously, the preliminary report recommended that membrane treatment, microfiltration, ultrafiltration, best suits Englishman River water source. So we needed to match, not all treatment works for different water sources. We needed to fingerprint Englishman River and find the best match. And membrane or microfiltration, ultrafiltration is that. So knowing that, we're going forward with the preliminary design of the new treatment plant. This was a requirement that MVIHES basically didn't order us. They basically changed our operation rule and changed it so that we have to have water treatment. It's not an option. We have to have water treatment, and again, by 2016, in line with our new intake. That kind of, we had scratched our head back in 2009 because it foiled our plans of phasing it in as phase 3. Now phase 2 and 3 are joined now. Microfiltration, ultrafiltration won't filter out dissolved minerals, what that comes out as color. People can see color over a value of 15. So we need to do, and that's an aesthetic thing. You can have a colored water of 60 and it can be potable, but you fill your bathtub up and it looks like tea water. So yeah, there's many cases, even a lot of well water, it comes out. It is drinkable, but it's got a very high concentration of total dissolved solids and minerals that create color. It's an aesthetic thing, and being a water purveyor, it's something we have to be aware of. And somebody phoning me up saying we spend millions of dollars and I got tea water, it's something you have to look at and do something about. Typically, engineering solution, the typical engineering solution, add coagulants, add chemicals, and dispose of it. So what you do, or another thing we're looking at is add additional treatment like nanofiltration or ion exchange after that to get rid of that color. Now that involves energy, that involves chemical. So what we ask our consultant to do is look at the chemical-free option. The chemical option, basically, there's the membranes right here. What you'd add ahead of that is coagulants. And some of those coagulants use aluminum sulfide, so alum. You can't put alum back in the natural environment. You have to put it back into a landfill or put it into a sewer. A lot of the sewage treatment plants that I've toured, this is where they fail. They forget about that. The residuals handling is huge. When you basically have to backwash these filters, along with it comes the aluminum sulfide, along with it comes all the sediment from the river source. You have to dispose of that somewhere. You have to have a lot of land. You can't let it leach out anywhere. And the rest of the water goes into the sewer. From where we are right now, it basically gets pumped twice before it goes to French Creek. So there's energy costs there. There's energy costs in trucking it out. Those are the things we looked at and said our consultant said you need to look at what is more feasible for us, but take into account the environment. So the chemical-free option, if we used another type of treatment, and if we relocated our water treatment plant into our public works yard, knowing that we bought this land, we could basically take the backwash from the microfiltration filters and throw it into wetlands on the adjacent site. And as a result of Gilles' work and conveying that message to us and saying, this area is pretty important to the Englishman River. There's a give and take here, and mostly gives. Where we are located in the industrial park in Parksville is what we have is a perfect integrated stormwater management plan by a fluke. We have ditches that don't hold water. We don't have a formal outlet for this whole area. We have never had any flooding here. All the water goes into the ditches and infiltrates into the ground. And guess where it goes? Into the Englishman River. So why don't we take advantage of that? Take the backwash there into wetlands, recharge that groundwater, and again, help augment the flow of the Englishman River. So again, those are little tiny things that we need to look at and be innovative when we're going ahead. When we build some of these fairly million-dollar capital projects, to do something like this doesn't make sense. So a lot of questions that we're looking at, and we're really challenging our consultants with that. Really good. We went and toured a plant down in Oxnard, California, and just for that, unfortunately, again, the lights are pretty bright, but they're doing the same thing. They're taking the backwash off their filters and throwing it into the wetlands and recharging their aquifer. More with this plant is directly adjacent to a sewage treatment plant. They're taking the effluent off the sewage treatment plant and treating it to a potable water standard. The plant is already built, they're waiting for regulation, and they're madly writing regulation in California. They're in dire straits. In 20 years from now, they have no more water. They have to 100% start recycling their water. That's one of their first treatment plants that they're going to be doing that. So that molecule of H2O that's going through the sewage treatment plant into the water treatment plant will be recycled. They need to be doing that. They realize it. The nice thing about this, they're using the backwash, putting it into the wetlands, but the agricultural industry has come to the city and said, we need your water. In years past, they never had the same thing that's happening down there. Their aquifers are depleting, they're declining. It's too late for them. They're spending major money. This they got a grant for. It's an amazing plant. It's state of the art. They have a huge educational component because they obviously need to know the people. It's recycled water, but they want to, they need to educate the people about that. So it's an amazing thing. So. And this is kind of an illustration. Typical East Coast. We got lots of rain January, February, March, April. Getting into the winter storms, October, November, December. The inverse of that is our peak water use. When in the summertime we're using lots of water. That's the inverse. That's the water demand. And again, it's very challenging. How can we harvest all this water here for use when we need it right there? And obviously following the rainfall is the Englishman River flow. It gets very low during July and August, very high, very peaky in November, December storms. That's the average flow of the Englishman River. And then obviously we have a capacity. Our peak demands will be exceeding our capacity. And we really want to curb that down. This is where we thought ASR, if we can capture this excess of water during the winter time, capture it from the winter, treat it to a potable water standard, and store it for use in the summer. And that's the general concept of aquifer storage and recovery. Obviously that's good for fish, because if we can use that in those critical months from middle of August to the end of September, when the first kinks come in, then the Chinook, and we can be on our ASR water, all the better, more water for fish. So this is how the concept we're looking at for the winter months. We're looking at an ultimate 50 years from now storage of 1 million cubic meters of that winter water to store underground in an aquifer into a confined aquifer. So in the winter time, our dam is collecting water, and our river is running. We have an abundant supply of water from the river. If we can treat it in the future water treatment plant, and then throw it underground into the confined aquifer and store it there. The opposite of that, in the summertime, our dam is releasing water, so we're augmenting the river flows. And we're treating water and we're giving it to the public. And we would take that water out simply in the summertime, out of that aquifer. No more. What we put in is what we take out. And actually we leave about 30% of it left as a buffer zone between the drinking water and the native groundwater, just as a buffer for that interaction between those two water bodies. And along with that, what we also do, when I call it loss, but when we release water from the Englishman River, from the dam down the Englishman River, we actually lose about 30% of that. Some of that is, depending on the time of year, it evaporates. And most of it actually recharges that Englishman River aquifer, especially in the upper reaches or where it goes down into more of the gravels and sands, the alluvials. That actually recharges that. We have no idea how much, but we just know if we release 1 cubic meter here, we get about 0.7 down here. It's pretty easy. About 12 and a half hours later, we see that water come down. So why ASR? It gives us a third source of water supply. We have our wells, we have our surface water, and we potentially could have this other source stored underground. It could reduce our water treatment plant size. We don't have to build. We could phase it in slower. We could build ASR wells. If they are more feasible, we could look at phasing that in. It balances our water supply a little bit more. If we have problems with one operation over our wells, we can go on to one. Redundancy is key. Provides cooler water to customers in the summer. That was a huge thing in Oregon. That's all the public wanted. How do we get cold water? We love it. Because in the winter time, when you take that water, it's about 6 to 8 degrees centigrade. When you store it in an underground aquifer, it stays at that temperature until you take it out. Consumers love it. Fish love it too, right? If we can take, and I'll talk about that later. It's more feasible than conventional above-ground potable water storage. What I mean, and an example is our Top Ridge Reservoir. We built that 4 years ago. It holds about 4,000 cubic meters. We built that for a cost of $1.6 million. That's roughly $400 a cubic meter. ASR, what we're looking at, to store about 100,000 cubic meters at a cost of just over $5 million. That equals about $5 a cubic meter. So pretty cost effective when you're looking at it that way than conventional above ground engineered storage. It allows treated water from winter months to be stored for use in the summer. Already talked about that. And less surface water during peak summer demands. Good for the environment. More water available for fish during those critical times. So if we can essentially dial back our water intake from the Englishman River during those critical times when the fish need it, and you use our ASR water, ideal. And again, defer or reduce infrastructure expansion. So there's obviously a lot of challenges with ASR. The major one is upfront engineering and investigation costs to do that. We have to do our due diligence. We poke a lot of holes in the ground. We hire hydrogeologists, geologists, a lot of capital. About 70% of it is capital, a lot of well drilling, and I'll show you some of that. Currently there's no regulation, no groundwater regulation with Water Act. Doesn't define ASR. The Water Act needs to be modernized, and we'll be the first in BC to do this, so we'd be on essentially the bleeding edge of technology with this. It's hard to do it, but I think it's a definitely worthwhile venture to be doing this and piloting on a very small scale, and then start there. Somebody's got to start it. They've already started down in Oregon for this purpose. It was for fish because they had limited extraction on tributaries to the Columbia River, and communities there said, and it was one of the main inventors down there for the ASR was actually a farmer, because he could do it. He saw it, and he had limited extraction on one of the tributaries to the Columbia River, and he did it. He said, I got to do this, and he actually invents one of the valves that actually regulates the water going down into the ASR. So it's people like that, and having that sort of that forefront of technology and that intuitive thinking that brings us to these technological advances, and that's why we're here, and we're going to be first in BC, first of its kind in Canada. The one in Waterloo, Ontario, it's in an unconfined aquifer. We're putting ours in a confined aquifer, and that's more standard practice. So we would take the water from our proposed intake to our treatment plant, and then run it along just past the weigh scales to our K-Road pit. With that, we would also supply an emergency connection to the K-Road area, because they're currently on wells right now, but if anything did happen to that, why wouldn't we give them a connection? We're basically right their neighbor next door. So with our investigation, we installed 6 monitoring wells within this area. And there's existing wells. There's one located at the weigh scale station. It's a moisture transportation well. And there's 2 wells over here. There's one in the upper aquifer and one in the lower aquifer, and I'll explain that later. This is the Seven Springs Ranch over here. We did a 10 to 12 day pump test here, fairly extensive pump test that gives the hydrogeologist, Gilles can talk about this a lot more than I can. Basically it gives a good idea where the boundaries are in that aquifer and how much yield that aquifer can have. And based on that, you can determine how much volume that aquifer can actually take. So we did the cycle test, but what we determined, basically the aquifer is on a bit of a pinnacle here. It's very longitudinal, but majority of the aquifer is to the southwest of this area. We have boundaries over here by the highway, and we have boundaries just to the north over here. Luckily, the Regional District of Nanaimo owns this land, so we have 2 wells located on this land here. So in July 2013, we installed a temporary water main. That's what it looks like from our Top Ridge Reservoir. And it's above ground right now, and we're injecting water as we speak. So stage 1 consisted of 25,000 cubic meters of surface water from the Englishman River. That equates up to about 10 Olympic-sized pools that we've actually injected into the aquifer. We extracted 25% of that and performed a water quality analysis on that, and also a hydraulic analysis. Stage 2, we're currently underway. We want to inject about 65,000 cubic meters of potable water. And with that will be done, and we'll have a feasibility report to us, I'm hoping, by spring of 2014. And it will determine how feasible this actual aquifer is. Again, this is a pilot project. It's going really well. We had some initial difficulties when you first inject it. Don't believe the well was fully developed, but with additional development and surging and extraction, it's actually, the trending is looking quite well. Again, I mentioned this is in a confined aquifer, and I'll just show a very basic illustration of what that is. So on the bottom we have bedrock. And then we have the lower aquifer right here. It's a confined native groundwater, and it's a water-bearing sand and gravels. Above that, what you have in the confining layer is heavy silts and clays. That's about, we have 15 to about 20 feet thickness over top of our groundwater. This water-bearing zone ranges from 10 to 25 feet in thickness. And then on top of that, there's another aquifer, so a second aquifer, what you call a typical water table. When you dig down, you have shallow wells, and it's in sands and gravel. And then on top of that, you have your overburden. That defines what we are looking at. We have our ASR well into the confined aquifer, obviously confined with the bedrock and the confining layer of the heavy silts and tills. And then our monitoring wells, we have both monitoring wells in the upper aquifer and in the lower aquifer. And what we found when we inject that potable water, we actually see the source. This is what the native groundwater looks like when you extract it from one of the monitoring wells. It is drinkable, that it has very high TES, hydrogen sulfide. It's the aesthetic qualities, the taste and odor qualities is what it has. The monitoring well, after 3 weeks, so we're looking at here, it's basically displaced that. So we're putting our drinking water, which has a color of that, into it, displacing that native groundwater and the interaction in basically what we're seeing. So that's why we put in monitoring wells, to give you just a real general concept. The upper monitoring well, we're looking at levels. We also take samples out of here, but there's no use, because that water level hasn't budged, which is what we want to see. So that's why we have 2 monitoring wells in the upper aquifer as well. And we've also, again, that's our produced water. We've after our first stage 1, we actually took out water and ran for several weeks after and produced water. So with that, we take it to the labs and we do water quality analysis, make sure it's conforming to health standards. This is what the Vancouver Island Health Authority wants to see. So they need to see all our due diligence, all our testing needs to be bundled up. We'll have that report in the spring of 2014. We're looking at the Claudette wells. Right now, they've developed some wells out there. They have problems like this. They have more problems than this. They have ammonia, naturally ammonia occurring in those wells. They're very high yield wells, but unfortunately they're not potable water. The health authority doesn't like them because they have the naturally occurring ammonia. We could use ASR in those areas to recharge the area. It could be used, ASR could utilize this aquifer storage and potentially help out with those water quality issues. What water we would deliver to News would stay in News. So we could deliver them water in the wintertime, and they could be essentially off our water in the summertime and use that ASR water. That's something we're looking at. We need to do further investigation. Again, we'd have to step into it as a pilot project, but that could be another phase of this ASR. But first, we want to look at the K Road ASR well and see if that is feasible. So going forward, what we're looking at is a water purveyor. Obviously, we want to reduce our risk as people drinking water and increase our water supply. And obviously, there's the buzzword sustainable. Be very sustainable about that. What I mean is, it really is a triple bottom line. We need to balance the environment, economics, and social end of everything that we look at. Every part of infrastructure, we take into account all those 3. Going forward, to balance economics, we're looking at phasing an approach. If we can phase it in, if we can defer some of those heavy costs for the water treatment by bringing on ASR if it's feasible. We want to pilot technologies first, make sure it works before we commit to those millions of dollars of that infrastructure. And then obviously we're going to do some value engineering on once we finish our preliminary design, we'll get other experts, other operators, other engineers to critique the design, saying, hey, why did you put the valve here? Why didn't you put it on the floor where it's more operator friendly? If you're going to be operating it, that's a huge cost over 50 years if it takes somebody an additional half an hour to do their job. Those are the things that's essentially what value engineering, it can actually save you millions. For the environment, we built Aerosmith Dam. It's been a huge success. We've consciously looked at relocating the intake to a downstream location. And again, we're exploring innovative technologies like ASR, like wetlands, etc. We always want to look at that. And social, obviously we want to continue to future planning to service the community and provide safe and secure drinking water for both us right now and our future generations. Sorry. So basically what we have is 3 trains in motion. We have the water treatment plant, we have the ASR. It's a very small component of our overall picture, but I think it's a very key role. It could be a major player. And obviously our intake we need to build. So, to sum it up, I'm almost there, Faith. The Provincial Water Act, it needs change. It needs to allow better management for all water users. It needs to have different regulations. One of the oldest acts in North America. And we're looking forward to modernization of the Provincial Water Act. Small steps for the ASR right now. We plan to phase it in initially and see how it works in different areas. It's not something you jump into right away. It's been tried and true, but in different places you need to step into it very slowly and understand it, especially if you're being first in BC. Regulation needs to change. There needs to be description of what ASR is in the Water Act, etc. So it's something we will demonstrate, and I hope other communities can benefit from it as well. And learn and apply elsewhere. We can potentially, where aquifers are depleting, maybe we can recharge aquifers. Maybe in other areas, like I mentioned, out in Claudette Road, we can improve the water quality in those aquifers and turn them into potable water aquifers. We have an abundant water supply in BC, but only certain times of the year. So people don't understand, don't we have enough water? We do, but like I demonstrated, a lot of it happens in the wintertime, through precipitation, through the river flow. If we can capture and harvest it for when we need it in the summer and have more of a balanced water supply and management, that's what we're really looking at. Balancing of demands, environmental demands versus local aquifer and surface water needs. We need to look at that. And perhaps ASR can also be used for fisheries purposes to actually augment river flows. You take that water, store it when it's needed during the summertime. Fish love cold water, like the sockeye. When we release water from the dam, it actually cools the Englishman River 2 to 3 degrees. So again, if we can get more than that in certain areas, potentially the ASR can help for fisheries purposes. That's it.